All right.
Why are we live already?
Ha ha ha. We were listening to everything you just said. Chunky milk. Oh boy.
Nobody's listening. So.
Yeah, nobody's gonna pay attention at this point. Hopefully they can hear. Check, check. Okay, I'm seeing a green thing here, so that's good.
Just seeing what kind you got.
The raisin?
The oatmeal raisin. Please eat all those.
Oatmeal good, raisin bad.
Ugh.
I'm with you on that.
Both of
I've
them
made
good.
oatmeal cranberry. That was good.
They were good. They were good.
Really good.
Nah, I prefer my cookies with sugar and chocolate.
And then I prefer a cup of milk to throw me. Hey, we got somebody. Is that you watching?
No,
Oh, somebody.
we actually have somebody on here. Awesome.
Already.
So
37 seconds.
please be sure to let us know that you're
Sarah,
here.
Is that you?
Is that you?
Is that you? We've had some lively discussion already previous to
Apparently, I'm
this.
walking in the
Yes,
middle of it.
yes. So hopefully
Now, I know
other
why.
people will.
When you study Esther, you do a men's Bible study and a women's Bible study.
Ah, okay. That's why. Yes, for those who've just joined us, the one of you who are online right now, we just got done talking a bunch of conspiracy theories with regards to the Mandela effect, and we were in Esther, and we were all over the place. So it's been fun. So yeah, Scott, I hope you brought something to talk about today, because
Oh, gosh. What?
we just kind
Encouraged?
Scott just
well,
disappeared.
he has to. He has to bring stuff. Oh, he did disappear. Where did he go? That was weird.
And that's something you need to fix.
We got to see Scott.
Well, yeah, everybody needs to see Scott. That's the point.
Yeah, right.
Oh, he's sitting back even more. It ain't even changing. There you go. We can see him a little better now. All right, so if you are joining us on Facebook, or you're in the room, we'll just do the same thing we always do and just see where this conversation is going to go.
We lost a viewer already.
Oh, we bored him to death already. Put Scott in the frame, and he got. That's good. Obviously, we had a lot to talk about on Sunday night, and we won't have our Bible study this Sunday night, but last Sunday night we talked about the idea of the image of God and kind of some of the understandings of what that image would look like. And so we can open up to, if there's questions that can do with the image, it can be do with anything other than the Nephilim, and that knocks him out.
Scott's out.
And we'll see if anybody else shows up online while we're doing it. So, how's y'all's week going?
Good.
Good.
Yeah. Nothing special.
Now, Joe, that camera is like embarrassing, but it's not magic. It doesn't create like a sewn shut mouth. You can talk. Ah, that was perfect. That's good. How's your week going?
Oh, pretty good.
Yeah, I feel very caught up in your life now. Thank you very much. How about you, Wade?
2 days into it. Hard to tell.
It can go either way here.
We're
When do you
leaving
leave to
Thursday
go on
evening.
vacation?
Thursday evening, going to the lake. Be back Tuesday. Leave again Thursday. Going to Branson.
Branson. That'll be expensive.
For those people
almost paid for
interested, the
already.
pickleball courts have now been repaired.
Yeah, back
For
to the-
did they
the-
know?
the
Did
side
anybody
thing.
notice?
A few
Probably
people.
not.
Did they? Okay.
What?
The kitchen was too short on
Those
one
back,
side.
both those back.
That
Wade
I
needed a
knew.
distinct
They
advantage.
were like a foot short.
I
Yeah.
knew something felt off.
He
I
cheated
looked at
us.
it one day, I'm like, that. And I measured, and I was like, oh, one kitchen is like a foot shorter than the other one.
Yeah.
We had to
Yeah.
fix that.
Yeah, I was playing on the other side. I could tell those people were getting closer
Mm.
to the net.
We're not going to tell you which one was off, so that way it'll fit your story no matter what. Awesome. If you're
Go
joining
for a night.
online, make sure you check in. Let us know that you're here listening and watching.
2 people need to say hi or something so we know who you are.
Otherwise, we'll just keep mumbling and grumbling.
And ask some questions, because we don't want Scott to take over
Yeah,
and talk
we
about
don't.
Nephilim the whole day.
I'm okay with that, because then I don't have to just keep filling in the blanks. So,
One of the, you did not let me ask the question about, you talked about Baal, you talked about other gods from other countries. Where did these gods come from?
it's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. I have speculation as far as that goes. I mean, whether the original aspects of it come from something biblical, we bored him away again. Whether it came from something biblical, like this the sons of God situation and the Nephilim and all that I don't think we can say definitively, but there are.
So we think they were made up?
That is one theory, yeah, that people just made them up to fill in holes and gaps, and that feels disconnected, but we do the same thing today. There's a reason why the number one genre in entertainment today is superheroes. They're just, everybody loves the hero's tale, especially the ones that can rise above what human possibility is, and so that's one way is to think that. For me, I do land along the same lines of they were probably something real that became legend and story, blown out of proportion for different elements, and they probably have to do with, the sons of God and the Nephilim and the wrong ones or mighty ones,
So
that kind of thing. So
there's a show on Netflix where the guy goes back and looks at the old like Mesopotamian or Peruvian, wherever they are. They go back pre-flood.
ancient apocalypse is what you're talking
Yeah.
about, yeah.
And every single story talks about there's a flood or an earthquake and a flood or a fire, earthquake, and flood.
Yeah.
But there was always something along the lines of a Nephilim or something that told everybody this is how we're going to maneuver through this crisis.
Yeah, if I were to ask you today, what would be one of the greatest weapons that a dictator or ruler could use to end any and all of his enemies? What would be a way that you could say he would do that today, in today's world?
You talking about nuke 'em?
Yeah, like a nuclear bomb, right? Do you have to be American to believe that that's a possible option? No, you can be anywhere in all cultures. So many thousands of years from now, they will read about all these cultures that have similar stories of when the United States of America, or when a giant nuke was dropped on an island in the Pacific Ocean during a major catastrophic war. So there's a couple ways to look at this. With regards to the fact that there are over 300 plus different flood narratives in all ancient cultures, it's a common motif in that time. You can look at it through the first way of, well, that seems to make the most sense if you're going to get a worldwide catastrophe. You're not seeing asteroids and comets. I mean, see them up in the sky, but they stay up in the sky. You never see those come down, right? But floodings and fires are things that can ruin your humanity right now, and can and have experienced that in your own tradition, regardless of where you live in this world, right? And so the idea of that common motif being a thing that the gods would use to destroy your own life or the world as you know it would make sense. As that there aren't weapons like that of mass destruction. That would be the weapon of mass destruction. Whatever hurricanes back then, they wouldn't call them hurricanes. They would be storms. They would be floods. They would be the outcomes of what modern science would now determine as tornadoes and floods and that kind of thing. But they would just call it storms, floods, natural disasters, earthquakes. So for that to spread across the world, that would make sense. That's what they knew as a mass extinction event type situation. However, it would also be completely legitimate for a culture all across the world to have descended out of an actual mass extinction event like a worldwide flood, and for those flood narratives to make their way down into the histories of wherever they are across the world, especially considering the next event after the flood is a separating out, a scattering amongst all the world. So you have different languages, different people spread out over the world with a common descent from a flood event. Those flood events would take on their lives of their own, would have their own heroes, would have a lot of similarities. Some of them would be true, some of them would be wrong. But even those would precede the written word, which is why biblical textual critics will say the Bible is borrowing from all these ancient beliefs when writing the flood narrative, whereas the Bible would claim, no, we're writing the true flood narrative and showing why this is true and how it sets apart from all the other narratives, as far as that goes. So is the Bible stealing from the flood narrative, or are they all still talking about the same events, but the Bible's clarifying? That's kind of where I would stand, and even more so, it works on another level where it's even not even necessary for an actual worldwide catastrophic flood event to take place for it to make a theological statement about what man left to their own devices leads to, death and destruction and iniquity, sin, that kind of thing.
So if you buy into this Nephilim type being that each of these cultures says was there, that would lead you to think there was probably some kind of written language back then. Where did all that wind up?
Well, our oldest language oldest languages on earth, or language on earth, written language on earth, is what leads to like finding like the epics of Gilgamesh and this kind of thing. Like the first written languages on earth write down these crazy mythological sounding stories, and they can be both from a literal state, as far as like if you go down the path of the Nephilim, these could be demigod giant figures, that try to rule the world. But if you go from the point of view that the biblical authors are trying to show that what all these cultures teach as amazing and good and follow these kingdoms, the Bible's going, no, that led to death and destruction and chaos. These figures that claim to be descendants from gods are actually not good, they're bad. And so the Bible is constantly trying to set the record straight as far as that goes, whether you believe those things literally happened or didn't literally happen. It doesn't really make a difference as far as that goes. The theological statement is that God is different and is not like what the world says is good or bad or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, yeah, they're bad, and we also are bad.
Right.
So there is only one God is good, everything
Right.
else not so good.
Yeah, just click on that. There you go.
Even the ones that we think are good are usually turn out, oh no, this guy's not what we thought he was.
Yeah, the primary thesis issue in all of Scripture is that man choosing wisdom in ways on their own is bad, and anything outside of God's own wisdom is what causes death, exile, destruction. And the problem is that we feel that through technological advances, time, histories, education, we can subvert that primary issue of mankind, today's world. And so, for instance, because we have the post-knowledge of what Christ did and how it makes sense in Scripture, we can go along in the modern age church today and think that we are doing things basically right, Meanwhile, it's like over and over and over again, the Bible is a great proof text to show us that, like, you're probably not. And just when you probably think you are doing it right, you're probably still not. And that's hard to get over because, Jesus often spent his ministry correcting the church of the time who knew and understood the Scriptures, interpreted the way of life. And he would come and completely flip that on its head and say, you think it's this, but it's actually the absolute opposite. And everything in this world kind of drives us into thinking we know better. We know what's right and wrong. And anything apart from what God would say, we could almost assume it's probably not. Like, we're probably just making a mess of things, honestly, if we really look at things. And so coming at things from that perspective, I think it humbles humanity a little bit more if you're willing to go, I think this is right, but unless I know conclusively, I'm going to keep asking God to keep being that director, the one of who gives wisdom and knowledge and understanding.
Just like our Joseph story, you sat there and you look, oh, Joseph's going to be he's the guy. He's got his act together. He's doing everything right, and that's the one we would choose, but yet Christ came through Judah.
Right, the one who slept with his daughter-in-law, who he thought was an actual prostitute, which somehow made that better.
Yeah.
Right.
You got the free pass on that.
Right, exactly. And so, and actually, I would encourage a lot. That would be an encouragement for a lot of people. Number one, I'd love to set the record straight. If anybody thinks that I'm trying to authoritatively teach these very strange passages like it has to be this way, I don't want people to believe that it is that way. In fact, don't take my word at all about any of this stuff. I want you to go to the sources, go to the Word, and ask God, believing that He's going to guide you into understanding and all of that. And so I think it is very dangerous when someone with a teaching authority will stand up and will teach things conclusively that aren't, that just about subjects that aren't just conclusively. And that's no different than deceiving. Because if you're wrong, you've just deceived. And if you're not willing to admit you're wrong, then you're just prideful. And so I think coming before the text and our understandings with humility, but trusting that God has guided men for thousands of years in understanding, take what teachers and preachers and commentators and that kind of thing with a grain of salt and test it through the scripture, through the word, and just be willing to be open to a different interpretation than that might even make you comfortable or might make you uncomfortable. Case in point, the Nephilim. That's a very uncomfortable subject for the church, and we don't talk about the potential of a celestial being, having a sexual relationship with a human and having a something giant of a child. You're like, whoa, that's weird. That's strange. That's science fiction-y, But the moment you close off to that, the moment you may be closing off to something that could also be a legitimate interpretation, and may have bring its own ramifications to it. So. You and I have had this discussion a lot, just personally speaking. We've had this discussion not just about the Nephilim, but about the flood. We've talked many, many times about Scott. He's very chronological, literal. It is black and white as it is, and I'm very like, nah, it's gray. Everything's gray. I'm not even willing to almost stay black and white, And so where you will take a literal flood, and I would lean way more towards a literal flood, there is room for possibility that it wasn't, or that it was local, or that it was even just a theological, polemical statement against the world that existed back then too. And so there's chance it could be all of those things too. And so it's just not as easy until I stand there and watch, Ark land on Mount Ararat. It's difficult to say like conclusively that there's no other possibility but a worldwide mass extinction event, which again I still lean towards that.
About Job, and I asked, when did Job take place? And then the question then is, did Job take place, or is Job a parable? And it's representing what's going to happen in the future. So, I don't know. I think it took place, and I think it maybe right after Genesis 1, Job was then. But hey, that's me.
You and very, very smart people believe that, and I have no real.
Good.
Yeah, I said no. I distinctly separated you from those.
Scott and the
There's
smart
Scott, but then also the smart people. And look. To be honest, like
You need to write a book now
yeah.
on that. So.
To be honest, there's a fascinatingly great and well-crafted arguments for that. But there's also fascinatingly great and well-crafted arguments towards just an allegory. And in these situations, I think that stepping back and going, all right, well, so what's the point then? Regardless of whether it was literal or allegorical, what's the point of it? And I think that's where you have to find the common ground there and go, yeah, the point is here. It's this. We understand that. Suffering isn't exactly what we think it is. It's not always clear to us. It doesn't have to be clear to us. We may not even be given the answer. Meanwhile, we're also given the answer in the midst of that, this narrative about a man, the suffering and righteous and blameless servant who loses everything to gain everything. Like, you're given the answer out in front while seeking the answer. And at that time, when you look at it like that, it don't really matter if it's literal or allegorical. The point is, Jesus will be the suffering, righteous, blameless one who loses everything, not just around him, but just himself. He offers himself. He's the inversion of the Job. Satan was able to touch anything but his life. Meanwhile, Satan will now be able to touch the life of Jesus. That'll be the inversion. And so, when you get into those points, and if you can step back long enough and realize what's the point of the flood, what's the point of these things, I think it makes clear some of the silliness of some of the arguments that people go blue in their face arguing, geological records as far as whether a flood actually happened and stuff. Sure, great. Okay, a flood happened. It didn't happen. It doesn't. The point is, the suffering, righteous, blameless one and those who are connected to him will come into a life of new creation. And even in the midst of that, Noah will still be a human, and he will still fall, partake in fruit, end up naked. Next generation will do something even worse, and the pattern continues. And so just kind of stepping back and trying to realize, like, what kind of things are actually worth arguing over, and what are we sacrificing when we're too busy making the side things the main things. So
you also have Satan would have never killed Jesus if he would have known that was what the plan was all along.
yeah,
There's things that are hidden from Satan, from me, from
Yep.
you, from everyone.
yep,
But it'll all reveal itself in time.
yep. Hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah. We talked about that a little bit Sunday night, about how the evil things are ramping up, and in Revelation it talks about I did say Revelation.
He took the S off.
So it talks about it ramping up and the birth pains and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it looks like we're ramping up. The evil stuff is ramping up and coming back at
Yeah.
an exponential pace.
That was like Jiff and Jiffy. Jiff with one
Jiff
F.
or Jiffy, yes.
Jiff with
Yeah.
one F or two F.
Yeah.
Revelation with an S.
We thinking, Joe? I see you're in Job there. What thoughts are going through your mind here?
Just reading a little bit about.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Well, we've had many conversations about Job, and one of them is God was on a council and let Satan. What about this guy, this perfect guy, and he offers him up,
Yeah.
and he can do anything but kill him, right?
Yep.
So, and then it's like, well, when did this happen? And that's when did it happen? So, I think it literally happened, and I think it like you said, I like things on a tell me if this happened in the year 22, or this happened, when.
Yeah. Yep.
So if it happened, Job would be like the second book of the Bible, probably, in my opinion.
Maybe the first. I don't know.
Well, you had to have the creation before you could have.
The creation is a chronicling of an event. It doesn't mean it was chronicled during the event. So Job could have been written before a written history of a creation narrative in Genesis.
Yeah, I guess, but I mean,
But yes,
Now you really
I know.
messed it up.
I know.
they've got the books where they need to be, I guess.
It's a good question too, because our English translation of the Old Testament moves books to different places than the original Hebrew ordering, and I think that there's some benefits to even going back and looking at how they ordered, and like Second Chronicles is the end of their end of their book. And when you look at Second Chronicles, it actually makes a little more sense as to why it ends there, rather than where ours ends in the Book of the 12. So, yeah.
This is Old Testament you're talking
Yes. Hebrew Scriptures is Old Testament. Yep. Yep.
So, the other books, they're not Hebrew chronicled, they're not Hebrew written?
And the New Testament is primarily Greek, and the Old Testament
No,
is
I'm
primarily
talking
Hebrew.
about the latter books in the Old Testament.
No, they're still written primarily in Hebrew. There's a few exceptions. Daniel purposefully will switch languages. There's a couple of the other books that they'll switch to a different language, like Assyrian or what is it? It slipped my mind at this moment, but yeah, it's written in different languages.
Because they're writing
Esther
to a
actually
different
might be it.
group.
Oh, there's lots of purposes behind them. Yeah. Daniel's really big into it, and there's a lot of meaning and purpose behind who he's writing to and why he's writing. And when read through that through that lens, it changes not changes, but it really makes certain what the theological statements or implications are of what you're reading in Daniel. So when you're reading chapter 1 in Hebrew, you're understanding that a Jew, ancient Israelite, should be reading this in his own language and understanding this is written to him, because in the second chapter, when it switches, I think at verse 7 or whatever, when it switches over to the, the Babylonian, dialect, now you're reading this from an Israelite and a Babylonian perspective, which speaks way more about discovering who the God of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is. And Daniel chapter 1 is all about, hey, remaining faithful in exile in this foreign land, whereas Daniel chapter 2 through 10, I think, is all about these testings that take place and how the non-Israelite Babylonian ones who think they're in power are not in power and in control. And so if you're reading those two languages from totally different perspectives, then you're gaining totally different theological implications. That if you're Babylonian, your God is not the one who's in control. Your king is not the descendant of God. He's actually the bad thing. And the little ones who keep remaining faithful to their God, who your king keeps saying, yours is truly the God, but then proving he doesn't believe it, it's going to have different implications than if you were an ancient Israelite reading that.
So a Jew knew what languages? What was, if you were a typical Jew?
It depends on your timeline, because if you're in Jesus' time, Koine Greek. If you're in, Daniel's time, you may maybe know Hebrew and why can I not? I'm misspeaking about the Babylonian language. It's going to drive me crazy too. It slipped my mind, but you may know a couple of them. If you're in Abraham's time, you may not. You may only know Hebrew. Well, yeah. If you're, that's why Jesus' time will know Greek, is because the Persians and the Greeks will end up taking over and ruling the world up to Jesus' time and teach them their languages.
Are we
if you're
going to
in,
do a study on? I'd like to do a study. I like Daniel.
mm-hmm.
Are you going to actually?
Aramaic. Oh, that was driving me crazy. Aramaic, yes. Am I going to do a study in Daniel? You tell me. We can sometime.
I want
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, there you go.
Are we gonna
There you
study
go.
the Bible?
Yeah. I don't care where we go.
Is Targum the same as the Aramaic phrase, paraphrase?
Targum.
Yeah.
Targum is the Jewish. It's the Jewish. It's not the Talmud. It's not the Torah. So the Targum is the Jewish ordering of, I think, scriptures. I don't want to misspeak on that one. The Talmud is the Jewish rabbinical teachings. The Torah is just the scripture as far as Moses's. So then the Targum must be the ordering of Jewish Targum. What's your say? Where you're reading that?
Job, this discovery of a Targum,
Yeah.
Aramaic paraphrase on Job from the 1st to 2nd century BC, the earliest written Targum, makes it very late. Date for authorship highly unlikely.
Okay.
It was talking about
It seems
second millennium was 2000 to 1000 BC.
Yeah.
During this,
So the Targum would be the Jewish commentaries on Job. So they've found early manuscripts of Jewish Targums that they think date back to as early as the 1st century of BC, you said?
said that actually during the second millennium BC, 2000 to 1000 BC.
Yeah, so this would have been during the Daniel's time. They have found writings like commentary basically during the time of Daniel, during the time of Esther, that time as early as that, talking about Job in that sense. So earliest manuscripts would say Job had to predate that, because obviously, if I'm hearing that correctly.
It's pretty interesting.
If you're joining us online, check in. We want to know you're here. I can see number 3, but I don't know who that is. So I'd love to know.
It goes on for another page or two after that. It's pretty in-depth before it even gets into the book.
Make a comment.
No, let's just watch Scott read Silent Time.
Can we focus on that?
It's good. Zoom in on him.
Hey,
We've talked about it quite a bit. That's the reason
Yeah.
Who is it? I can't see.
good
I
show.
don't know exactly what, I don't think they know exactly what it was.
Sheila Bass.
Miss Sheila Bass. Welcome, Miss Sheila Bass.
Well, from what I read, it looks like 2000 BC fits because of some of the, in Job, when they're raiding the
Mhm.
tribes and stuff, they said that that's when these guys would have been ratings.
You didn't finish the last.
Well, I'll read it.
You have to keep reading. Well, so by this point, though, the scriptures up to 1000 to 2000 BC, this is previous to Jesus' birth. By the time Jesus comes, we have very good reason to believe that the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament Jewish Bible, was already in complete and utter formation. Jesus gives us clues to that after he raises from the dead. He's speaking to his disciples, and he tells them that he's trying to explain to them how if they would have just listened, they would have known this was the plan from the start. Like, he had been teaching this, he'd been showing it the whole time. They were surprised that he did raise from the dead in a way. And then he sits them down, and it says that he taught them. Well, here, Luke chapter 24, it says that he says to them, "O foolish ones, slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ that he should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" So you should have seen, according to the prophets, like this was supposed to happen with the prophets. In verse 27, "And beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, he interpreted them in all the scriptures, the things that were concerning himself." And then if you skip a little bit further down, this is where he appears in the middle of the room, and he's like, "I'm hungry, you guys got something to eat?" And they start eating boiled fish. And it says, verse 44, "Then he said to him, these are the words that I spoke to you while I was still on earth. Everything was written about me in the law of Moses, in the prophets, and the Psalms." In the Jewish ordering of the Hebrew scriptures, the law of Moses is the Torah. This is the Tanakh, is what he's talking about. The Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. This is the law, the writings, and the prophets. And these are the three specific genres that make up the Old Testament that we read today. So by this point, by Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, that had already been formed. This is one of the passages that kind of prove that. Didn't you know, if you'd have just read your Bible, the Tanakh, you would have seen this was supposed to happen this whole time. And so the canonization of the Old Testament was already taken place, already been done at that point. Job's earliest Targum or commentaries on the Jewish would have taken place up to 1,000, 2,000 years before Jesus existed, which is why they would say that this is probably even before that was written, including, what he's going to claim here, when Moses and the prophets and Psalms all finally cohesively became one book. There's debate as far as when that officially occurred, but it was well before Jesus was on this earth. And so, but that also is different than the chronological, literary, historical figure of Job when he existed. That could have been, right after Adam and Eve and creation and after the flood, right up to those points. We just don't know. We have no idea.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls, what of the books that we have are in the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Oh, a lot.
Not all of them, obviously.
They have a lot. So, okay, so not all of them in their fullness. So, for instance, like there's very few that we have the fullness of an entire book that's still preserved. But what we have is we have a sheer vast number of both copies of these books, but then also of transcripts of early church pastors and leaders' teachings, church father teachings. And so where I would take Job chapter 1 and I'd teach a Bible lesson on it, that would be written down or scribed down, and then you would take Job chapter 1 in the Dead Sea Scrolls and go, hey, look, we got the first chapter of Job here. And by doing that, just by comparing the transcripts of the early church fathers in the first couple centuries, we have enough to fill in Genesis all the way, to the end of the Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures, Second Chronicles, and beyond, and into the New Testament after the first couple centuries. And so we don't even need copies of the Bible. We could just look at copies of the pastor's notes, and find all of the Bible. But then also we have, many copies of in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I can't tell you. Sure, extra biblical writings are part of it. Actually, a lot of early writings that we have really deal with like marriage contracts and buying land and selling land and stuff like that. There's a lot of those kind of things that they found, like in Egypt especially. We have really, really early writings that will deal with some of that, but Dead Sea Scrolls specifically, Enoch was in there. There's the Book of the Giants that are in there as well. There's several extra biblical books. Some of them are get pretty far out there as far as that goes, but somebody thought it was important to save, and but yeah, There's
So the Bible makes reference various times about the rest of the life of King such and such was written in the book of the kings of
Yeah.
Judah or something.
Yeah.
Where
the scroll of the wars.
what is that?
Exactly.
I mean, we don't know.
No.
Oh, well, it makes reference many
Several times, yeah, several. Ancient Israel, you don't need me to tell this. You can read this in the scroll of the wars of the kings. You know what I'm talking about. And we're like, no, we don't. I want to read that one.
So where have they found the scrolls in different places? I know you say the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Mhm.
What is?
There's
What are they- what is that
fascinating stories that have become legend too. So there's this one guy that I think is really interesting. He's actually supposedly where Steven Spielberg would come up with the Indiana Jones character. This is what he would base him off of. But his name was Tacitus, I think. He was if I believe correctly, like a 16th century German scholar, young guy, that fell in love with finding scrolls. And so he would literally like go across this planet in search of ancient scrolls from the Bible. And he's down at the base of what they believe is Mount Sinai. There's this St. Elizabeth, I think it's called St. Elizabeth's Cathedral or something, down at the bottom of Mount Sinai. He's there with a bunch of like priests, and the legend, which apparently is maybe just that, they don't know this for sure, but the legend is that while hanging out with these priests looking for old writings, they found like a false wall or something, and this false wall that they had just basically built up over this old room had baskets of these scrolls, and while he started reading them, realized that they were parts of the Old Testament manuscripts, some of the oldest manuscripts that he'd ever seen. And so, but they belonged there, and apparently they were tearing some of them up and throwing them into fire for kindling a fire or something. Again, that's legend. There's this really cool story where he goes back home and he convinces the Germans to send him back so he could go get these scrolls. When he comes back, they're all gone. And he's like freaking out because he's like, what happened? I wanted these scrolls. But he also didn't want to make too big of a deal of it because he didn't want to pay a bunch of money for them, you know? And as soon as those priests knew, they would be like, no, and he wanted to be able to see them. So he's wandering around this town and he's talking to this old priest about, yeah, I was here a couple years ago and I was looking for this scroll. And the priest was like, oh, I've got one. Took him back to his home, and he had it rolled up in a closet or something of his home at some point. And then apparently he was like, let me take this back and show it to the authorities that sent me here, and then we will bring it back on loan, basically. And then the legend goes that he stole it and never brought it back. And there's all kinds of theories by it. But he's one figure in time that would compile these things. In Ethiopia and in Egypt, they were very big about holding back ancient writings and things like that. And so they would have whole vast storehouses of scrolls and that kind of thing. That's why there's certain Ethiopian sects that still believe like First Enoch specifically is canon, where most don't. The Roman Catholic, what's the organization? It slipped my mind now. Where the Pope is. The archives, the Catholic archives. Apparently, they have the vast majority of. They're called minuscules and ancient texts, not as old as the Dead Sea Scrolls always, but they own a vast amount of those. So they used a lot of power and riches and time to kind of take those and get them into the archives there. So yeah.
There's just not a library you can go check one of these things out.
You can see the Dead Sea Scrolls on display at many different places, mostly in Israel at the Israeli museum, but they also have a museum of the Bible in Virginia. Is it Washington, D.C.? Yeah, that you can go and see large exhibits of that. And then every once in a while they'll take them on the road, and you can see some of them at different places. But the gathering of manuscripts have taken lots of legends. Like supposedly some of the Dead Sea Scrolls showed up on the black market like a couple years either before or after they were found, and like in a newspaper in New York where they were like, hey, found these cool scrolls, would make cool for a good collection. and you're like, well, how did you get them? Where did they come from? What are these? You know, all this black market of ancient scrolls have always shown up in antiquities and stuff. And so there's lots of cool and fun stories. You can go down that rabbit hole and study at different times. But I like the Indiana Jones one. I think he's kind of cool. So, yeah. Right? Man, we got 4 people watching now.
And another thing we talked about the other night was the Ark of the Covenant, and we've had a little bit of discussion. What is on the Ark of the Covenant? I know you talked about Indiana Jones. That's what he was looking for. But so, what is on the Ark of the Covenant?
I will be the first to admit that I am not a Ark of the Covenant. I'm not super well versed in the Ark of the Covenant, but it's this metal box, could not be touched really other than the Levites through these rods. They had these giant winged creatures on the top of the ark. On the head of the ark, if I remember, is the Hebrew word tevah, and it's actually the exact same word, or at least the play on words for the gopher wood and pitch that will be used to build the ark and to put together the ark, the literal tevah that will take Moses through the Nile River. So there's this idea of like this sanctuary play on words in ancient Hebrew. And so, but the ark would hold in it this tablets from Sinai, the broken tablets, I think they were the broken ones, the rod of Moses, and manna. Inside of it, and
The tablet you're talking about is the 10 Commandments.
yeah, and they were to carry those, but they started using them more as a good luck charm and a way to beat
Except for
people.
The Philistines.
Well, the Philistines took them back to the city of Gad, I think, or Gath, and it all ended up with a swelling. We'll just say it's called. All the guys ended up with swellings, and so the modern translation would be hemorrhoids. So they got that out of the city, and then they put it in the temple of Dagon, and one of their idols that they did rituals for to embody the breath of life into, and they kept finding Dagon tipped over in that temple every morning, and so then they got that thing out of there as well. That actually brings to mind, I forgot to bring this up on Sunday, with regards to man being made as the idol of God, the representation here of God on earth. The rituals that the people would do, such as like the Philistines and their god, their idol, their Dagon, they would hold rituals that would call down the spirit of their god to bring life into these rocks. And they believed that these rocks had life into them. Of course, they didn't move or anything, which is another reason why it is said that God would breathe the breath of life into his image bearers on earth, and we would come to life. You know, it's kind of a polemic to that. And so, and not through some weird ritualistic thing, it was during the act of creation. And so there's a lot of tie to our creation event and mankind having the breath of life breathed into them versus their rocks that are just falling over in the presence of the ark.
You made reference to, we're not going to get to Exodus, obviously, but when Moses...
You said that like you're going to die before we ever get to Exodus.
We don't know
Wilderness
when
for
that's
the
gonna
rest of
happen.
his life.
It's like you're never going to get out of Genesis 1, Adam.
But anyway, we made reference to that the plagues that were put upon
Yeah.
the Egyptians were actually against their gods. It was
Right.
to show that our God is superior. I mean, your gods are useless.
Yep.
So all of the plagues were like against the sun god or against the
Oh, there's a lot behind all
river
that.
god or
There's a lot.
frogs
So
or-
it does work in that way, but it also represents like a literal like decreation event. It ends in a plague of darkness. Like we get back to darkness, the darkness of Genesis 1. It's set up in like a triad of events that end in the death of the firstborns at the end. There's a lot to how and why, but it does say that Yahweh is the one who is coming to not just bring authority to the Egyptians, but also to the gods that they worship. And so to show and prove that he is the God of even their gods. And so there's certain aspects that you can tie in as far as why each one of the plagues were certain ones, but at the end of the day, it's to prove the great I Am is the one who controls the land, the water, brings life and death, all those things.
So they, wasn't there gnats or something, was that one of the plagues? And
It's one of the
so what
ideas.
was it,
Yeah.
they had a gnat god or something?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not
Well, I
done.
mean, well, I know they said that King Cole.
No, that's the first one.
Well, and it depends on, I mean, some of these translations, some of your translations will have something different. Like it could be, there were like gnats, there were flies, but yeah, they're boils, hail. He's the God who controls the things that fly in the sky, the beasts that creep in the field, the fish and the critters that are in the waters, and everything that creeps in this earth, according to Genesis 1. And that's what all these things are doing. It's to show you that this God controls all these things that he filled his creation with. And there may be some, like when he brings darkness, that may be a direct, polemic against the sun god Ra in Egypt. It may be. But I think definitively what he's doing is he's showing the God that we know. Right. Yeah.
But you did only read like a portion of Genesis Sunday night, the first like half of a verse, and then you just.
I said
we're
I
stopping
got
there.
to image and likeness
And that was
and
it.
never went any
You
further.
on,
Yeah,
and
you're right.
It was
I
all the way
know.
to Revelation, and you
Yeah.
skipped over the rest of Genesis.
Sorry. Go read it on your own. That's the point of the class. Like, go read. Get in the Bible every once in a while.
Well, my point is, I've read the Bible several times, and I don't get everything that you, I don't get any of what you read.
Scott, I don't get any of what I get sometimes. Like, I'll read these things and be like, oh, that's cool. I never saw that before. And
Okay, well-
I may have even taught on it at points. We're very
Good
quick
thing
to
you
forget.
have
But
that very
that's not
literal-
true,
I
though.
think the biggest.
I've had conversations with you that show me that you've gotten those
The
things.
biggest problem with me is remembering what I've read to know that and that goes together.
Yeah.
When I read here and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, but way back here it said the same thing, and I don't remember that.
But if we exist in a world that seemingly is trying to tell us the opposite thing, the smartest thing you can possibly do is to quit trying so hard and to just trust that God will bring to mind what he
Right.
wants to bring to mind to you at
What
that
we
point.
were doing earlier with Exodus, that
Yes.
was, to me, that's gonna
Esther.
stick better than reading through it over and over and over again.
Right.
Doing that right there was,
No, with Esther, you said Exodus.
I mean,
Yeah, Esther.
Esther.
They
Because
don't.
we've talked about Esther numerous times.
Yes.
And every time we add more to our.
For
'cause
those-
You can flip that board over.
For those off screen,
Got
we have a
Esther on the other
whiteboard.
side from the last time.
Yeah, we got a whiteboard of writing over Esther over here.
Yeah,
of,
the other side is the last time we talked, you don't have near that.
pretty
much of it.
interesting things. So yeah. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not staring at
Jeff's-
Scott.
Jeff's
I'm looking at a
said
board now.
Jeff
Who did?
Tompkins.
Hello, Jeff. Awesome.
I don't know if he's still here, because we were up to 4 when he said that.
Got a couple more minutes if you guys have any other questions or anything else you want to talk about, and then we can.
Yeah, we'd
can
love
end
to
it.
have their questions instead of.
I'll even
We
put that on
would.
here
We
to
really
ask
would.
questions.
Please.
The rest of us are gonna have to come up with topics at some point.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, save us.
I mean,
He's
no,
done a good job.
I'm sure
No,
nobody
yes.
wants to hear what my questions are.
You have questions. Everybody else has the same questions sometimes. They just don't want to. They don't want to ask it. You're brave. You're a brave man.
He is brave.
That's good. I don't think nobody else paying attention. They're just trying to puff my ego. They turn us on and then mute us instead of
Yeah.
down.
To show someone.
Well,
Right?
to reiterate what Wade said a minute ago, he said, so I've read, I remember we were in the Joseph study, and we were talking about the Benjamites where they wiped all the men, they killed all the Benjamite tribe or something, right? Well, how would we have, it was back in another book where they talked about that happening, and then all of a sudden a Benjamite wound up, and you're like, how am I gonna know that?
Yeah, because that's the point. That's the point in Judges. At the
Well,
end of
it is
Judges,
a big point, but I didn't know it.
when everyone, well, right. But as you keep, it's Hebrew meditation. You're supposed to do this the rest of your life. You got your whole life to keep finding this, stuff. And so it's you
Well, I
going
got
back
less
and
of that than you did.
well, maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
Got a question?
Oh, right.
Totally off of any of the subject we've talked about.
Hold on. Let me finish whatever I was saying there. As far as at the end of Judges, everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes, and what was right in their own eyes almost wiped out an entire clan of people, through which we'll find then King Saul, which is again who was right in their own eyes. They saw him beautiful; he should be the king. Meanwhile, God's like, no, I should be the king. But then they don't, and that's where we just watch this descendants keep going down, and it just gets worse and worse from
Yeah,
there.
well, see, that's important, but I have read it, I read right past it.
Right, but now next time you won't.
Agreed, but I.
You can't have it all. You can't have it all, Scott.
He just wants you to do the work for him.
I don't have it all. Did you not hear me say? I actually don't know much about the ark, so there you go. That's what I got. So,
There's a lot of blood on it.
yeah. What's your
All
question,
right,
Sheila?
So
Change the
Sheila
topic.
Bass said, Allison talked about a chronological order Bible on the last biblical bites.
Mm.
How would you read it? Just start at the beginning and keep going?
I have no experience with a chronological Bible. I've never actually read a chronological Bible. But you have.
I did. Me and my wife read through a chronological Bible, and sometimes I wish it would have stuck to the regular order of the Bible like we have just because.
Especially the first 4 books of the New Testament. I just read that. I just read Matthew.
And you're reading it over again.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's like reading the same
And
book.
that almost to me made me want to say, I've already read that, I'm gonna skip it, but then you're gonna miss some little difference.
I think that would be my encouragement, is whether it's a chronological Bible or just an Old Testament or your own normal Bible or Hebrew scriptures. I think the best thing you can possibly do is just slow down. We make it way too much of I want to
A
set a
drudgery to have
goal
to read
and
it.
check off that list and make sure I get it through in a certain time. And I say, like, don't do, just sit where you're at, and see where it goes. And
Yeah, and by the way, the one we read through was a year layout, so you get it done in a
Yes.
year. It took us almost 2 years to get
Yeah.
through it.
which you're still I mean,
I
we're
think that's
trusting
very-
the word doesn't. You're getting familiar with even stories that you don't even know this time through, and you can do that the rest of your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. The word won't return void. It's just. I would just encourage, because our nature is to just try to speed through or make some sort of a game out of it or something. And I would just say, you don't do that with your husband or wife, hopefully. So just quit trying so hard to force something and just spend time in the Word, wherever that leads you or however that goes. Yeah, it's a good question, though. Thanks for giving a commercial for Biblical Bites podcast. That's funny. You can just say it, you don't have to
No,
type
I
it.
wanna
but like it.
get her to.
I thought she said something else. That just.
No, she.
Oh, thanks, there you go.
Did now, thanks, yes, slowing down is the key.
Yeah, I think in some ways. So I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is.
You
So
just keep baking cakes.
Keep
Don't slow
trying.
down on that.
yes, absolutely.
And she
No
said she
slowing
loved
down
the
on the cake
podcast.
before.
What'd you say?
She loved the podcast.
I thought you said she left. And she left the podcast. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for showing up online. Thank you for trying to call me during and in the room.
So
And
next Tuesday,
yeah,
we're doing this or what?
you tell me. I'm here, so I'll do it. If you want to.
Wade's not gonna be here.
I'm gonna be on my way back home.
You tell me.
No one ever talks but you, so
I'll be here.
We do this.
Talked.
We do this Monday through Friday.
finally.
Joe talked.
But I did.
I had to,
He brought up the
I had to
Targum.
let,
I
Sure
never
did.
do.
had to
Yeah.
open
I
the
wanna
gate.
read that, by the way. but
Yep.
I didn't wanna do it during the middle of the.
And we got a question. Well, we had all kinds of milestones today.
Sheila's baking today too.
That's awesome. Good. Well, all right. We're going to end the live stream. Thank you guys for coming in and get to reading the Word. I don't know. I need a cool catchphrase or something to
Yeah.
end things like, get in the Word.
Ready?
Yeah.